being Sunday. Sunday is the day in which we remember the resurrection of our Lord, and therefore it is the day of light, the day in which the Lord breaks through death and comes out glorious and luminous to reveal to the world through the power of his resurrection. Tomorrow we will speak of a different theme, but today we are going to speak about Lourdes as a land of light. In Isaiah chapter 9, the prophet tells us that the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who inhabited in darkness, those who were in the land of death, have been illumined, the word of the Lord. There are two very important things in this verse from Isaiah. Before the coming of Christ, all of the people of God, even though they were the chosen people, they did not walk fully in the light. They were halfway. They still walked blinded, because even their knowledge of God was not total. It was stained and altered by original sin. But the people that walked, the people of God have always walked. That is one of the characteristics of being a people of God. And this comes from the beginning of the Old Testament. The people of God must walk. Remember when he speaks to Abraham, he tells him, I will give you this land and you must take this promised land, and the people must walk behind you. But for the Lord, it was not enough for his people to be halfway in the light and halfway in the darkness. He came to give us the full revelation of light. Now, what are the consequences of being in the darkness? Here we see it. It says, they will dwell in a country of death. To be in darkness is the death of the soul. To be in sin is the death of the soul, or to not have the knowledge of God and the knowledge of the faith has as a symbolism death. But nevertheless, the Lord prophesies in Isaiah 9 that a time will come when the people of God will walk in light. Now, I know that if I ask you, and it's true, when I ask you, where did light break into the world in history? You're all going to tell me in the moment of the incarnation, and that is perfectly answered. However, God breaks through the darkness of sin when he creates the Blessed Virgin Mary. So the birth of the Virgin Mary, the first creature that is totally immaculate, the first creature therefore that is full of light, because remember that sin is symbolized by darkness. The first creature that experiences the light of God in its fullness is the Blessed Virgin Mary. But she is not the Redeemer, she is the mother of the Redeemer, and that is why, being already the light of God, being here on earth in a creature, she is in silence and will be not as revealed, because the one that must be revealed is God made man, who comes to liberate. What the Blessed Virgin Mary experienced was the liberation in advance. The liberation from sin. She is not God. She is not the Redeemer. She was redeemed. But her redemption is different from ours, because her redemption is in prevention. That is to say that she was prevented from sin entering into her. We, on the other hand, are born with sin, and with baptism we begin to live in the light of God, to live in the light of the Blessed Trinity, to live in grace, and then it is a personal choice for each of us whether or not we maintain living in that grace or whether or not we lose it. But God breaks through in human history in the silence of the creation of the Immaculate Conception. This is important because we are in the only place in the world where the Virgin Mary, when she has appeared, Remember that the priest would tell Bernadette, tell her to tell you her name. He would ask her every time, and every time that Bernadette would ask, Our Lady would simply smile, because it was not the hour to say her name. Nor did she tell the priest to stop being so annoying. On the contrary, she smiled. And here we begin to see teachings of how Our Lady speaks to man before his demands. What does Our Lady do? She smiles because she is totally free. She loves that priest. She knows that that priest needs to make those questions, but she is the queen and the lady of this event because God has sent her, and so she is the one that has the watch of what happens in every apparition. Our Lady appears in this place, and she says in her last apparition, at last she tells Bernadette her name. I am the Immaculate Conception. And so here something very important happens. This is not only the first place where she has begun the revelation of her name, but she does not reveal it beforehand because it had not been proclaimed as a dogma. She always waits for the order of the church. And this is very important. Was she always the Immaculate Conception from the moment that she was in the mind of God? Yes. Did the church believe that she was immaculate from the beginning? Yes. But in one particular historic moment, the church proclaims it as a dogma of the faith. Whoever does not believe in the Immaculate Conception is in mortal sin. This is the impact of a dogma of faith. But Our Lady, for example, in the miraculous medal says, O Mary conceived without original sin. What is that? The definition of the Immaculate Conception. But she does not say, I am the Immaculate Conception in 1830. Rather, she says it in 1858, 4 years after the Church proclaimed her Immaculate Conception as a dogma. Therefore, the act that Our Lady appeared here as the Immaculate and everything that surrounds this apparition is a manifestation of light. That is why in Lourdes, Lourdes has been called the land of light. It has impacted me, impressed me in a singular way, and it must have a certain significance because we come to Lourdes many times. But brothers and sisters, since the day that we arrived, from that same afternoon, after we ate something, and we had Mass, and after we ate, we came to the grotto and we were taking pictures. For me, the Our Lady that is crowned was extremely luminous, and I thought that maybe they put new lights. I looked and no, it was the same amount of lights, but she was so brilliant that we could see the brilliance of the statue on our faces. We took pictures and the pictures are amazing. You can even see a great luminous cross behind her. All of the pictures that we have taken from here, Lourdes, all of them have rays of light. That night we went to the grotto to pray and to entrust the entire mission. And when we entered, I said, wow, look at how illumined the grotto is. And I saw this from the corner. The grotto was illumining all of the people. And when we entered and we looked at Our Lady, well, you could always see her, but this time it was like Our Lady was coming out. The light was coming out in a very impressive way. Even the candles were extremely luminous. It was so luminous that I asked, what do you want to tell us? Why are you so luminous? Why is there in all of the pictures rays of light? And we're going to connect all of this later on. But here, the first thing, we must enter into the event of the apparition. Bernadette, you saw that they put the statue of Bernadette, that's something that is new. Where she is, the grotto is there, and then the river, and then Bernadette is there on her knees. That is where she was when she heard the thunder the loud noise and where she saw the luminous grotto. The first thing that she hears is something that calls her attention, and she thinks that it's going to rain. And she tells her cousin, "Careful, it's going to rain." But in that moment, she saw a great light that completely covered the grotto. And this reminded me of what happened in Bethlehem. Because in the stable, which is a grotto, the stable of Bethlehem is a grotto, it was filled with light. It was totally filled with light. And she sees this immense light. The first manifestation of Lourdes is an immense light. Where does this immense light come from? The grotto. But we have spoken about this many times. It was a garbage dump, the darkest place of the town, where all of this light comes from. Here, Our Lady begins to show signs. What are these signs going to be? That she comes to break through history with light in the darkest places and in the darkest moments in our history. This is the reason why I think there's so much luminosity in all of the pictures, because it also happened in Garabandal, because Our Lady always comes and breaks through history with the light of Christ with which she is filled, the light of the Blessed Trinity, so that she may enter into the darkest places, symbolizing that she enters into the darkest moments of history. It's so difficult to imagine it. The grotto is filled with light, and in the midst of that light, she sees a luminous lady. And so I was thinking, how do you see among so much light something luminous? That means that the lady was more luminous than the light. That is to say that the luminosity of the lady was what was shining in the grotto. There is something that I have been thinking about in these days since Garabandal, that night of all the questions, and where we spoke of the guardian angels, of purgatory, of hell. We spoke about everything. And there was something that remained in my heart when I went to sleep. Lord, we know about heaven, and we know about the communion of saints, and we know that the saints are praising you, and that the angels are there, but we don't know so much about heaven. We don't study heaven enough, nor what the spiritual life with the three dimensions of the church. The militant church, we know it very well because we are in it. The purgative church, do we know enough about purgatory? We know a little bit, but the most that we know is that if we do plenary indulgences, the souls in purgatory go straight to heaven. And we also know that it is a transitory place, but that it is a place of suffering, but it is transitory. That means that it's not eternal. And why is there suffering? Because we need to purify the sins that here we did not purify. And so we must go through the purification. Of heaven, we know that it's our goal, we know that it's all happiness, that we will see the face of the Blessed Trinity, that Jesus will be there, that Our Lady will be there, that all the saints will be there, but we don't know anymore. And I was saying to myself, we need to know the reality of the communion of saints between the three dimensions of the church. The church is one. And we always think of the one of the church and the fact that we are all over the world and that the church is one. But the church is one with the triumphant church. That is why we can have this relationship where we are laughing of the things of God, of what He would do to me. That is why we can have that relationship with the saints, and we should have that relationship with the saints. We should not only pray a novena to them, but they should be a part of our life as they are in heaven, but also with the souls in purgatory. But this is my reflection in the room, and the next day we're walking to where Conchita received the Eucharist from an angel in Garabandal, and we're speaking of the triumphant church the angelic church that goes to an angel goes to church, he brings a host, he goes to a church, he brings the host, and he gives it to a young person. There's something very mystical going on there. But when I leave from having explained this, a lady comes and says, "Oh, Mother, I grabbed this book, but I don't know what it's about, but I brought it for you as a gift." And when I look at the title, Padre Pio and the Souls in Purgatory, and I was saying, I have to read it in the day, not at night. But it was like the Lord was confirming, because we spoke of Padre Pio and the angels. But what I was thinking, brothers and sisters, is that people say it feels like we're in heaven. You're in the pine trees and it feels like you're in heaven, and we don't know what heaven is like. That means that we have pieces of heaven in our souls, of that desire for heaven. We know that what is not of this earth, what the world does not give us, we know that that is heaven. The world can only give us things of the world. It cannot give us heaven. So when we experience something that the world cannot give you, we say, oh, it's like being in heaven. What happens when Our Lady appears? When Our Lady appears, or if the Lord were to appear, when Our Lady appears, heaven comes down to earth. But it not only comes down, but the effects of heaven stay here. And that is what you feel when you pass by the grotto and when you're praying, or when you enter into the piscines, or when you're serving. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You feel full of grace, that you're in a place that is full of grace, and we don't even want to leave. That's what happens to the people that die and that experience getting to heaven, and the Lord gives them the grace of returning to earth. They say, I didn't want to come back. Why? Because we were born for heaven, and we were created for heaven. That is why each place of operation speaks to us of desiring the things of God, of desiring the path, the peace that we live. We see how people go and they help others, as here how our sisters that are sitting on the thrones, and that the brothers are helping them. Fraternity, solidarity, the desire for prayer, the desire to see Our Lady and to just stay looking at her as if you've never seen an image of Our Lady. There are so many things that are evoked in places of apparitions, and that's because heaven is here. Heaven came in its fullness when Our Lady came, but the effects of heaven stayed here. Therefore, we can deduce that when Our Lady appears full of light and she illumines the darkest place of the entire town, which was the garbage dump, we know that heaven is a place of light. And that's the first thing that all those who experience this death and coming back, that's the first thing they experience, that it is a place full of light. But light is not just for when we die, brothers and sisters. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And if we receive the light of the world every day in the Eucharist, then that is why He can say that you are the light of the world. That is the only way that we can place these two phrases together. He is the light of the world. But then He tells us, and you are the light of the world. And so how can we be light of the world? Only if we are filled with the light of Christ, if we are filled with the light of our Mother, if we are seeking the things of heaven, and the things of heaven are first, as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, if our eyes are fixed on the things of heaven. Therefore, I'm going to show you certain elements of heaven that Our Lady reveals here. First, heaven is a place of light, and that is why they call this place the land of light. Because Our Lady appears in all the apparitions, she appears surrounded by light. But in none of them had she appeared in a garbage dump. That is to say, think of a garbage dump. Think of that grotto filled with all of the trash without any bags, okay? Filled with the trash and without any light. It's a dark place. everything is rotten. Try to imagine these things, because that is what sin does to our heart and to our soul and to our life. Now, the next thing that Bernadette says is that Our Lady calls her. Where was Bernadette? At the other side of the little stream, not the river, the stream, through which Bernadette never put her feet into because it was cold water. And she had a chronic asthma and pulmonary problems, and therefore she would never cross this stream. First, because she doesn't want to get sick. Second, who wants to go to the garbage dump, you know? She went to look for the pieces of wood for the fire. But Our Lady calls her, and here something else begins. Our Lady calls her and tells her to come where she is. Where is Our Lady? In the garbage dump, in the grotto. And where's Bernadette? On the other side. Here there are two great obstacles. In the midst of Our Lady and Bernadette, there are two obstacles. From Bernadette, we have fear. Because of fear, she does not cross. And Our Lady tells her to cross. Our Lady is teaching Bernadette that love is stronger than fear, and the only thing that expels fear is love. And therefore, in the kingdom of heaven, the love of God wants to expel our fears so that we are not paralyzed. And so she calls her to go out of her fear, and Bernadette walks. And from the part of Our Lady is calling her to enter into the dark world, the dirty world. And that is why she asks her during the apparitions, penance, 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 for the conversion of sinners. To enter there, Our Lady was calling her to be a cooperator of the work of redemption for sinners, because the grotto was a symbolism of the people that walked in darkness, and therefore there is a bad smell. You know that there isn't any bad smell in paradise. Bad smells enter with sin. There was bad smells, there was rottenness. And so she has to do two things. First, she has the fear to get sick and the repugnance of going to this place with these conditions. There, the path of life of Bernadette begins. You have to overcome yourself. To be able to be close to Our Lady truly, we must overcome ourselves. And we must overcome everything that in me impedes me, truly impedes my closeness with God and with Our Lady. This can be small things. Tell me, Bernadette had some reason in fearing the cold water. But Our Lady tells her even that fear of something true and normal is an impediment for the will of God in your life. And so here we have the obligation of seeing what are the impediments in my heart, like Bernadette, that do not allow me to go to where Our Lady is, even if it is a garbage dump. And when she finally comes close, she sees her. She sees her fully. And what is the first thing that Bernadette says? The lady was so beautiful. Imagine that Bernadette is already beginning to contrast two things: the ugliness of the world and of sin, and the beauty of the purity, of the obedience, of the sweetness of all the virtues. Here it is a school without words. Sin is ugly. Beauty is of grace, to be with God. Bernadette says that she was dressed. She describes her just as we see her, right, in white with the blue sash. But here is something that in heaven, how do we treat others? Oh. How do you think that St. Teresa of Lisieux speaks to St. Margaret Mary? Right, because we must incarnate things. How do you think St. Anthony speaks to St. Louis de Montfort? Because that is how we're going to have to speak to one another in heaven, brothers and sisters. That is how we have to treat one another in heaven, and that is why what we do not purify here, we have to purify. If somebody here on earth, you don't like somebody here on earth, well, start liking them, start loving them, start doing gestures, because in heaven you're going to have to do it. And if you can't do it here, you're going to have to do it in purgatory. What does Our Lady do? The first thing that she does with Bernadette, with this little girl who is poor, who can't even learn the alphabet, who can't even learn the catechism, which is why she couldn't receive her first communion. We're speaking of the Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, all the litany, speaking to this little peasant girl. But nevertheless, Bernadette says that Our Lady treated her with kindness. Our Lady treated her with kindness, with an immense kindness, with gentleness. We must write these virtues, because this is how we must treat one another. With kindness, with gentleness. I love, she says that I felt so respected. For a little girl here of the town, for a whole lady, the Lady of Heaven, to respect her. And she inspired so much trust in me, because at the same time she showed me that she trusted me. These are all celestial virtues. But Saint Bernadette is able to interpret this, because our souls were created for this. She knows what kindness is. She knows what delicacy is, what respect is, what trust is, or what the lack of it is. She says, it impressed me how she asked me things. This is very important, brothers and sisters, because if there is something that we have lost in the world of today, is the way of asking things. We should return to the basic rule of saying thank you and please, of asking, would you be able to? Would it be possible? Because we can't just tell anyone what to do as if I deserve that they do it. Our Lady tells Bernadette, could you do me the kindness of coming here every day for 18 days? This is Our Lady. She could have told her, I want you to come here 18 days. Would you have the kindness of coming? This is the way that we must speak to one another. This is not just something for Our Lady. Could you please do me a favor? Do you think you would have the time to help me with this? Do you think you can hold this for me instead of hold this for me? Here, take this. No, that means that we do not respect one another as human persons. Therefore, Our Lady teaches Bernadette here how she who is full of God and therefore God relates with the human person. Here she is teaching the dignity of the human person, which is the third point from heaven. The way we relate with one another and how we treat one another. It doesn't matter how other people are. It doesn't matter how they treat you. You have to respond with respect, with delicacy, even when you have to say something that is true. In many occasions, Our Lady has to instruct Bernadette in certain things, but the way that she says it is a formation. Second, are you writing down the points of heaven? How we treat one another. You see how these characteristics connect. Another point that Bernadette says, how she looked at me. She looked at me as if I were important for her. Imagine how much healing, interior healing in Bernadette this evoked. Because, brothers and sisters, the people of God have something in their gaze. They have something in their gaze that make the other feel that you are important. In this moment, you are who I am speaking to. That is why when people would see St. John Paul II pass by, even if he passed by super fast, time stopped. He looked at me. There was 5 million people, but he looked at me. All the 5 million people say the same thing. But why? Because Our Lady, the people that are filled with God, see as God sees. How did Jesus go walking through the multitudes? I love to relive the Gospels in my mind, imagining them, Jesus walking through the multitudes. Someone saying, heal me, liberate me, look at this, look at that, all the things that they were screaming at him. But Jesus goes looking at every person. And that is why there are so many times in the gospel that it says, because he knew what was in their hearts, because he was seeing each person. And therefore the transformation of our gaze, we have seen the transformation of fear, the transformation of our gestures and the way we treat one another, the transformation of our gaze, of our way of speaking to one another. Then Our Lady enters into a dialogue. I like this. I want to stop here because we're in a time in history, in ecclesial history, where you hear dialogue everywhere, up and down. But dialogue, let me tell you, is fundamental in this time. Because nobody dialogues. Everybody sends chats. I'm not speaking of the mission of Lourdes chat because we must do it in this way. But I'm saying that I'm speaking in the way of human relations have deteriorated when we have all of the means of communication. Our Lady enters into dialogue not to speak of anything. She speaks in dialogue with her to instruct her, to teach her. She comes as mother and as teacher. This is so much so that we see that Our Lady would say, well, why do you speak this, like this? Why do you do this? And Bernade would say, I do what Our Lady does. That identification and that imitation with Our Lady is very clear in Bernade. Also, she instructs her about her life, her vocation, her suffering. She instructs her of what she needs of her. And there's three things that she asks her. First, penance, prayer, and to offer herself for the conversion of sinners. These are all dialogues of Our Lady with Bernade. She appears crowned with 12 stars. Why? Because she is directing us to Apocalypse, the book of Apocalypse, chapter 32, where she comes is transformed into a place of victory. That is why those that are converted here, the most important thing here is that people convert. That the sick are cured, yes, of course. I hope many are cured. But they're going to die anyway. What is important is the conversion of the heart. And this place, or any place of apparition, or in your daily personal prayer, it can be a victory of God, or it can be a victory of your flesh. You decide, even if you are in prayer. A victory of God is if it changes your heart. Another thing that we see here, and that I love, is the communion of saints. Remember that we speak of the communion of saints with those that are in heaven, right? But the communion of saints is more than just those who are in heaven. It is this. According to St. Paul, when he would speak to the communities, he would tell them, live in the communion of saints. That does not mean live with those who are canonized. He's speaking, live with those who are part of your community, the communion of saints. But here we see it in the processions. We see it with those who are taking wheelchairs. It's very easy to distinguish visibly the communion of saints whose bond of perfection is love. Love. It is the bond of perfection of the communion of saints. That is why in heaven, Saint Bernadette, there's very funny stories, because we're going to speak of that. She had a very strong devotion to Saint Joseph, and some novices would tell her, but you pray so much to Saint Joseph, won't Our Lady be upset? If you saw Our Lady, and she would say, no, that doesn't exist in heaven. In heaven, there is none of this. There is none of these things that happen among us that are, I'm not going to say the words for. She appears with her feet bare. For me, this is something that is very important. This means the poverty of spirit, but it also means the detachment of the things of the earth. But it also means that the Immaculate appears barefooted, and she puts her bare feet in a garbage dump. I can assure you that here, beginning with me, it would be very difficult to go into a garbage dump like that. And that if we go into a garbage dump, we put gloves, we put plastic wrap all over us, everything, right? And then we put perfume and everything. Well, the Immaculate Virgin put her bare feet as if she were saying, well, the bare feet says something, speaks of someone that is totally of God, someone that is totally detached of the things of the world. And that is what is going to transform this place. Her total docility to the will of God, her total obedience is what's going to transform this place. Therefore, in Lourdes is a place of the victory of God, just like any place of aberration, but here it is very visible. It is very visible to see the elements that Our Lady wanted to teach, that have become visible for us, that have been made visible. But that the gestures that are done now with the pose, that is not the total immersion, but let's say as it were before, as it is now, your participation is important. Your participation is to help this person to receive the grace of Lourdes. Something that I noticed, that when Bernadette is before Our Lady, her face was totally luminous. What does this mean? That when she was before Our Lady, she was filled with the light of Our Lady. And not only when she was before Our Lady, but when she would speak of the apparitions, she would be filled with light. Why? Because she was reliving in her interior the grace that she had received in the grotto. It is a place of beauty. Our Lady comes here and she reveals herself here. It's so beautiful. But here Bernadette places so much emphasis on the beauty of Our Lady. Remember what Our Lady said in another apparition, I am beautiful because I love. That is what beauty is about. The beauty of Our Lady. Oh, we have to go. The beauty of Our Lady signifies that in her there is nothing that makes her ugly. We become ugly because of sin, because of our imperfections, by those areas that do not represent the life of God. Therefore, I believe that the principal message that the Mother wanted to give, just to conclude, as she appeared in the grotto to a girl that lived a very difficult life. The world in the cachot was very difficult. The life of her family was very difficult. And she appears to a girl with a very difficult family life in all the different senses, in a place that is not beautiful at all, in a grotto, in a garbage dump. And yet, what does St. John say in his prologue? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness, even if they, as much as they would want to, cannot overcome it. And this is the sign here. We may all have difficult lives, we may all have difficult circumstances, but Our Lady, who is the light of Christ, tells us here in the greatest, that even the greatest dump could not overcome the light of Christ that resides in the heart of Our Lady. And therefore, the message that we must take to Mass is, Mother, may there be a victory of God in my life today. That today the light of Christ, the light of God, may be the great triumph that there is in my heart when I receive you in the Eucharist. That today there may be a victory of God, which Our Lady is always the one who brings the victory of God. That today she may bring the victory that happened in the grotto, that went from a garbage dump to a sanctuary, that grotto that went from dirty to become a place full of roses, that what happened there may happen in us, and that may be the greatest triumph of Our Lady for us and of Christ as we receive Him in the Eucharist, because if He is the light of the world, then we can only be witnesses of the light if we live in the light of Christ, and if we communicate it because we are filled, like Our Lady, with the light of our Lord. Now let's go to Mass to Saint Gabriel.